Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I'm sitting in downtown Los Angeles, a little east of downtown Los Angeles, with Anthony Riboli of Riboli Family of San Antonio Winery. We are actually sitting in the oldest and only winery in downtown Los Angeles, and we're going to talk to Anthony about the Riboli family, San Antonio Winery, and everything else. So welcome, Anthony. Tell us a little bit about where we are and what you guys are doing.
Well, thanks, Allison, for letting me come on the show. So we're a very unique family business, first of all. So we were started in 1917 right here in downtown Los Angeles by my great-great-uncle, Santo Cambianica. So we have a very unique history. And people always ask, why is there a winery in Los Angeles? That's always the first question. So if you go back in time, this was a very agricultural area, a huge Italian population. And so it really does make sense when you look back. Today, though, we've seen phases where, wineries in cities were not so looked upon highly. But this new trend with, local and urban wineries, local breweries, distilleries have all become really popular now. And so we're seeing a renaissance, and frankly, downtown Los Angeles has gone through a renaissance.
So you're the only winery in Los Angeles. Are you doing your production here?
Yes. So we no longer bring grapes here just because of sewers and disposal, but we bring in juice. So we ferment all of our whites actually on site. And then we blend and bottle reds and whites here year round.
And where are you getting your fruit from? Do you own property? Are you leasing? Are you buying? And what areas?
So we, for many years, bought grapes, but really starting in the 80s, the family felt that we wanted to control our own destiny. So our first purchases were actually my grandparents purchased a small property in Napa in Rutherford in the 80s, and then in Monterey. So we currently have 4 properties in Monterey. And then really the new evolution, let's call it, of the family has been in Paso Robles. So Paso Robles is an area that we had bought grapes from for, 30 years. But in the last, let's call it 8 years, we've now purchased property and planted our own estate vineyards. So we now own 5 vineyards in Paso Robles. So Paso is a big focus for us, as I mentioned to you earlier. And we feel it is one of the shining stars of California winemaking.
Wow. That's a lot of vineyards that you have. In those vineyards, what's your total acreage that you own, and what are the different varieties that you are growing?
So combined, it's probably about 1,000 acres planted. So, Napa, of course, is mainly Cabernet Sauvignon. It's a small vineyard, a little bit of Petit Verdot. Monterey, we really focus on the Burgundian varieties, so Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. We also have a bit of Riesling and Pinot Grigio as well. And then Paso Robles is really a huge number of varietals. The area really does lend itself to many different varieties. So, of course, the Bordeaux varieties, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Petit Verdot, Malbec, even some Cabernet Franc, Sauvignon Blanc as a white. And then their own varieties as well, Petit Syrah, Syrah, Viognier. So we really have a nice mix of different varieties. And then we planted some unique things like Tannat and Tempranillo, just small, just kind of to have fun with. So that's, Paso really has a really diverse, soils and diverse climate. And that really allows all these different varietals to do well.
And your total case production?
Well, by variety, it varies. So certainly, and by brand, we do have different brands that we've created. So, for example, Madalena, which is named for my grandmother, that brand is probably about, 40,000, 50,000 cases. San Simeon, call it 10 to 20. And then we have our Riboli family Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley and Rutherford. We only produce maybe 1,000 cases max. So we have a lot of varietals and a lot of different special blends, sweet wines, non-sweet wines. So we've always had that diversity in what we do. And I think that's been probably one of the secrets of our success, is letting the customer be happy whether they like a sweet red or they like a dry white, right? And then everything in between.
And are your wines available across the U.S. and beyond?
Across the U.S., we're growing more and more. We do have an imported wine called Stella Rosa that's been very popular, and that's really allowed us to grow beyond Southern California. So for our history, we were direct to consumer before direct to consumer became so popular today. And we had 10 tasting rooms, my grandparents, at one time. So direct to consumer was right here in Southern California. So for many years, we sold everything we made locally. So with Stella Rosa, though, that brand, an Italian brand that we import has grown across the country. And that's really paved the way for also our estate portfolio of California wines. And so, yes, we are in all states, but that's a process that's still growing. And it's part of what, I certainly do with the rest of the family, is try to promote our California wines.
So what is your first memory relevant to wine?
That's a good question. I would say, wine was commonplace, certainly for us with my grandparents on his side are Italian, both of them Northern Italian. And so, as a kid, we'd go over for dinner at my grandparents' house. And, even as a kid, you'd have your little wine and water. And so that's probably the first. And then really from there, it'd be the winery itself, because as kids, this is what you do when you were on Christmas vacation. You'd come in and help in the tasting room, or, if it was always part of who we were, even as kids.
So do you remember the first or most memorable wine you ever drank and the occasion for that wine?
It's a good question. First or most memorable, I guess it's both, right? So what would that be? That's a good question. I think probably as, I'd been consuming wine, but in, getting it out of college, I remember my graduation, we had some large format, I think there were 3 liters of a single vineyard Chianti Classico called San Felice, which we still import. And I just remember that as being a really interesting wine. And then going to visit there in Tuscany, it was pretty amazing as well. So
sort of what the bug that bit you at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Traveling the world abroad, what is the best foreign wine you've ever drunk? And it may have been that Chianti Classico, but I don't know if there was another one.
Oh, that's a difficult question. I think, I try not to have a California palate, so I really do enjoy a lot of other wines. Right now with the 2016 Rhone vintage being so great, I've really been enjoying Rhones, but Beaujolais, I like the whole mix, Spanish wines, you name it. So actually consuming a wine in another country, that's a good question. Where was my favorite? Italy, certainly. I would probably still say Tuscany, being there. And when you're in the vineyard and you're in Tuscany and eating, Tuscan pasta, it does have a psychological influence as well, right? So
that's true. So among all the populations of the world, who do you think drinks the best in terms of quality?
That's a loaded question. That's a tough question. Oh, I don't know. I think there's very good consumers and call it consumers who drink lesser quality in every country. I don't think there's any country that has, the elite only drink the best. Even in Italy, being, homegrown into Italian, you have these wonderful wines, and then you have people who are consuming, Chilean and South African box wine in Italy. Mm-hmm. So I think it really doesn't matter. And in the United States, look at the diversity of what people consume. I think there's people who love great wine, and there's people who it's a beverage.
Mm-hmm. So you were saying that you're drinking a lot of the 2016 Rhones and some other wines. What would you say is the most expensive bottle in your cellar? I'm assuming you have a cellar based on the wines you said you just drink.
I do have a cellar, but it's not a basement, unfortunately. It is just one of those nice wine refrigerators. Keeping wine in there is tough, though, because, I think the days of aging wine are becoming more and more difficult. But I do have a secret storage compartment here at the winery. It's a box that I built that has a lock, and my dad does not know the combination because he would sell everything in it in the tasting room. So the other night, I had our vineyard manager and his wife visiting from Paso Robles, and I went in and brought out a 2007 Riboli Cabernet Sauvignon from Rutherford. And I've had experience with aged wines, but our vineyard manager really hadn't, and it was holding up really, really well. So again, I think it's great if you could be patient. Unfortunately, I think our society has moved towards instant gratification. And even with wine, when they buy it, I think the number is, most people consume within 24 hours or something of a purchase. So I just don't know how many people are aging wine. So what percentage?
Well, you age it for them and your father can then sell it out the tasting room door.
No, he cannot. I'm not allowing him to.
Do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
No. I think that every variety has its benefits and faults, and where you're growing it certainly has an influence on that, and soils. So I don't think there is. I think consumers can attach themselves to certain varietals, but part of that is probably just they haven't tried. It's just comfortable. They haven't gone out of that comfort zone to try other varietals.
Mm-hmm. And a loaded question, but what's your opinion on critics and scores?
Oh, that's a good one. I think it's about consumer confidence. I think that it gives people, when you're in a store and there's 10,000 wines on a shelf to choose from, if you can go on your phone and find a review, or there's a neck tag there that says 90 points, it just gives confidence to a consumer when there's so many choices. So I think that's a good thing. However, then you've got the politics and the games and what is a 90-point wine, and what you think is a 90-point wine, Allison, may not be what I think is a 90-point wine. And that's always going to be the reality of our industry. So good and bad with critics.
So this is a question as a wine consumer: red, white, or rosé?
All.
Still or sparkling?
Both.
Champagne or another region's sparkling wine?
I still love good champagne. Where else? I mean, I'm not a huge Prosecco fan, I'll be honest. I think a really great champagne is still top notch.
Now, obviously, food and wine play a big part in your world, because here at the Tasting Room, you have a restaurant, and you come from an Italian family, so logically, food and wine are a huge part of your life. So I'm curious how you approach food and wine pairing. Do you think there are hard and fast rules, or do you think there's a more creative way to do it?
I think there are certain rules that do help. And again, I think it's all about who are you talking to? And if it's a new wine consumer, I think you do want to try to keep things simple. Now, can we cross lines? Certainly. Pinot Noir with salmon, for example. Yes, absolutely. And that works. But a lot of consumers are so fearful, again, of being judged and, that, I can't drink a red wine with fish, or I can't. So I look at it as how adventurous does someone want to be? But hey, I think having a seared ahi, steak with a red wine, not just Pinot Noir, but it could be a nice Rhone, for example, a Grenache blend, even from California. I think there's even a Merlot, a nice Merlot, not necessarily a big, huge Merlot, but a medium-bodied Merlot. I think there's a lot of games that can be played. It's just about how adventurous does that consumer want to be.
Mm-hmm. So on those occasions when you drink a little too much wine, and I'm sure that happens in an Italian family, do you have any remedies for hangovers?
No, just drink a lot of water. I think that's the secret, is just hydrate as much as possible while you're drinking wine, and then the next day as well.
Do you think that there's something that people miss out on by not tasting your wine?
Well, I think it's always great for people to try other wines. And again, I think the hardest thing is name brands are reliable, whether you're talking about jeans, whether you're talking about any item, clothes, you talk about cars, people have confidence in brands. And so I think often people become in a rut where they're going to drink a brand of wine because they feel confident in that, or they're having guests over and they don't want to be embarrassed. So I would say try our wines because they're not everywhere. They're not as mainstream as a lot of brands. And I do feel, this will be 20 years this month. that I've been doing this professionally. So it's taken a long time to get to the point where we have our own vineyards, state vineyards, and our own brand new winery in Paso Robles. So controlling from grape to bottle, that's a new thing for us. And so I would say, yes, go out and try something different, including our wines.
So space aliens were to land on your property, or you get one of these non-drinkers to come here and try your wine. What is the wine you'd want to present to them?
So just pick one that you want to impress folks with, or okay.
I assume you want to impress them.
Yes. Okay. So what would be? That's a good question. It's which is your favorite child? It's a very difficult question. I would probably say, just because, I certainly love Napa Valley, but Paso Robles is very close to my heart just because of all of our new vineyards. So we do a Bordeaux blend called San Simeon Stormwatch, and I think that would be my wine to pour.
So you've been doing this for 20 years and drinking wine even longer. Do you think that each vintage tells a different story? And what I mean by that is, do you think that there are more things that you will see in common year after year, or more things that differ?
That's a very good question. I think harvest is a challenge no matter what. And when people say, oh, it's an easy harvest, I don't think harvest is ever easy. There's always going to be, let's say, levels of difficulty in a harvest, but there's always something that's going to happen. So, I think it's about taking what you can, and your experience certainly is going to help, but with Mother Nature, she's going to always throw us curveballs. And with global warming, and there are differences that we can even see, I can see as a winemaker. Now, not every year is the same, but there are different factors that, again, is it just global warming? Is it just the fact that after 20 vintages, you've seen a lot? But I think every year it was going to have its challenges, and the goal is just to try to be consistent. I think, especially when you're looking at just consumers, they don't want giant, as you know, changes from style from one year to the next. They want something. There could be a little bit of a difference. So that, I think, has been the biggest change for us as winemakers and grape growers is how do you try to create consistency every year within those parameters of vintages.
Mm-hmm. Are there any signs or omens that will help you predict the outcome of a harvest?
Not really. Again, I think it's you can get a vibe, I think, of how things are going, but I try not to judge. I know everyone wants to make those statements like, oh, it's an A year or a B year early on. I'm pretty cautious because I think that really in any vintage, there's going to be A wines that you produce in your winery, and there's going to be Bs, and there's probably going to be some Cs, no matter how great the vintage is. I don't ever remember a year where every wine was an A.
Do you have any good luck rituals that you, as a winery, do or as an individual at the start of harvest?
It's a good question. The family, certainly being good Catholics, likes to have a blessing of the winery. And so especially Paso Robles with the harvest, we do that every year, which is great. Then totally counter and probably pagan to that is in Paso Robles, especially later in harvest, there's always this omen that tarantulas are bringing rain. Now, I don't know the truth of that, but my head winemaker Arno, and I, when we're driving, we never run over a tarantula. And if it's not a busy road, we will actually help the tarantula off the road because I just think they're really cool. And I just think it's bad luck to kill a tarantula. So that's my pagan ritual during harvest for good luck.
Oh, a little superstition in there.
There you go.
So speaking of superstition or sort of the nether world of wines, many winemakers will walk in their cellars and talk to the wine in the barrels. Maybe they'll talk to them in the vineyard. Do you speak to your wine? And if so, what do you say to it?
I don't speak to my wine, unfortunately. No, I think here at our winery and tasting room in Los Angeles, with all the tourists coming through, if they saw me on their tours talking to the wine, I think we would have problems. So, yes, I think it's about talking to all of my team during harvest is more important than talking to the vines or the wines.
So some people read tea leaves in the bottom of the cup in order to predict the future. If you could read the bottom of a red wine glass, what would you like it to reveal?
About us or in general? Okay.
Anything you like. What do you want it to reveal?
I want that glass to always reveal good luck. I think that's always just like toasting a glass of wine, the good luck and hopefully then and happiness and that enjoyment of what you're about to consume as part of a meal or with friends and that positive part of what wine is.
So when you were a little boy, what did you want to be when you grew up?
It's a very good question. So that phase, there are many phases of what I wanted to be. So when I was in grammar school and high school, I actually wanted to be a veterinarian. So I still have a ton of pets with my wife and daughters. We have a full house of animals, yes. So that didn't go away completely. But then my father actually did not push for me to be in the business. He wanted a doctor, lawyer, engineer. So I was at undergrad at UC Santa Barbara and studying medicine and studying undergrad to go into medicine. And just decided my senior year that I didn't want to be a doctor and things were changing with HMOs. And so at that point, I really had all the science and wasn't sure what to do with it. And that's when a family friend in the industry said, well, you should probably apply to UC Davis. So then once I was at Davis, I had never had any formal training. I wasn't involved in production. My dad's a sales guy. My uncle's a sales guy. We'd never had a family winemaker. So we'd had plenty of winemakers, but never a family winemaker. So it really opened my eyes to what we needed to change at that time, because you're talking in the late 90s, and we needed to focus more on winemaking quality, not just packaging and marketing. So, those two things they're all important, but we really needed to focus on the winemaking. And so being there, number one, I enjoyed it. So that I think is always what I tell anybody. I don't care what your passion is. If you can do that professionally and at least make a living at it, go for it.
When you're not working, how do you spend your free time?
Definitely with my wife and kids and the family, even the family that works here. So it's always important because I spend a lot of time at work. I mean, we live this business. We love this business, but we live this business. So that, as I mentioned, we have our mini farm at the house. So between the cats and the dog and the fish and the rabbits, we have a lot going on. So there's always some type of cleanup or, general organization that needs to occur. But just traveling with the kids doesn't have to be far, whether it's going to the desert or going to the mountains or the beach. And just so that part of life is fun. Yeah.
And for those romantic evenings that you get, maybe occasionally or more regular basis, what is the wine that you would order?
Whatever my wife likes. So, yes, my wife and I have very different tastes in wine usually. So if we can find something that works for both of us, that's always good. Or she can have a glass of, Prosecco or a white to start, and then we'll order a bottle. But it's hard to find that perfect wine. Let's put it that way.
So you were just offering some advice to our listeners about enjoying what you do. I don't know if you have any other advice you'd like to offer them, but I'm wondering what the best piece of advice is that you ever received.
Very good question. Again, I'd say my grandmother, Madalena, she always really inspired us as a mother, as a winemaker, and again, as a visionary. It's kind of our tagline for her, but it's true. And she told all of us, not just me, but she always said, you have to keep evolving as a company and as a person. And take those challenges and try new things. Never become stagnant. And, hey, you're not going to hit a home run on every new idea, but if you can hit more home runs than strikeouts, then you're going to always move the company in a positive way, evolving.
So on that note, what would you say your proudest achievement is in your work to date?
In my work? That's a good question. I think the planting our own vineyards in Paso Robles, that's been a big step because that was from the ground up. In Monterey, we've had business partners that really did most of the vineyard establishment. And in Napa, it's a little bit further away. So it wasn't, when I was at Davis, I was involved more. But with Paso Robles, it's been really that kind of culmination of all these years of being in this business, the experience. So planting our own vineyards and then frankly, building and designing our new winery in Paso Robles. So those two things really all within this last, like I said, 5 to 8 years, it's been a whirlwind, but it's been a great experience.
Do you have a favorite film about wine?
Film about wine. That's a good question. I pretty much avoid films about wine. I like films that have wine in them, but I really don't. I have my least favorite film about wine, Sideways. Absolutely. That killed the Merlot business. We were doing really well with Merlot until that movie came along. And I really didn't like the movie, to be honest, but I also had selfish reasons for not liking it. But no, I don't watch it. Again, when you live it and it's your business. I mean, I've heard people love, Mondovino and a lot of other movies, but I just saw them. Again, I think I'm more of those, with younger kids too. I'm watching a lot of kids movies. So.
Well, I always talk to Pinot producers who love Sideways because of what it did. I very rarely talk to the person who's been harmed by that side of it. Are you a supporter of any sports teams?
Me in general, or me personally? I am. I mean, I've always been. I played soccer, in high school, and love that. So I do like watching, a lot of European soccer. So again. It depends on what you're watching, but certainly Juventus, which is where in Torino, where my grandmother's from, her, region. I'm a fan. And, now that LA has 2 football teams, that's pretty cool, professional teams. So this year the Rams are doing pretty well. So we'll see how they do. But other than that, we're right near Dodger Stadium, which is literally, as the crow flies, probably half a mile away here in downtown LA. But I have to admit, I'm not a huge baseball fan. So that's not been my cup of tea for many, many years. So,
well, the Dodgers lost, so we won't talk about them right now. But if the Rams were to win, or Juventus, which is probably more likely,
yes.
What bottle of wine would you want to present to them to celebrate?
Well, I think with Juventus, again, it just depends. If it was our wines, it would certainly be nice to present like our Stormwatch or a Napa or Riboli Napa Cabernet. But they might want a Barolo, being from that area. But a lot of those players aren't even from Italy, so let's be honest. It's probably a crapshoot. But I'd want to present one of our wines, yeah.
So a VIP is photographed by paparazzi sitting in a restaurant. And in the background of that photo is a bottle of your wine sitting on the table. Who would you want that person to be drinking your wine? And it could be alive or not alive, from any walk of life.
That is a very interesting question. Now I have to think about that. I would say, I'd say Winston Churchill. I think that would be pretty cool because he certainly liked his booze in all forms, and big champagne guy, loved his scotch, but I think a really good bottle of wine, and it would be pretty interesting, yeah.
So you were talking before, when we were talking about vintages, a little bit about climate change. Do you think that we'll be drinking wine in 300 years' time, 500 years' time, and beyond?
I hope so. I mean, not just for perpetuation of our company, but I believe truly, even if I wasn't in this business, I would still be drinking wine because I do like to eat and cook, and food is an important part of, I think, being human. And wine, I believe, is part of that. Certainly moderation, and it'll be interesting to see trends in moderation. I mean, we still have so much anti-alcohol, and I understand that. But alcohol in moderation, I still feel, is a benefit, even though there are those who will claim that any alcohol is is a negative to health. But I just frankly believe, eating well and eating healthy, but enjoying life, that food and wine are just part of enjoying life.
So complete this sentence. A table without wine is like?
And a table without food.
If you're heading off to a deserted island, what are 3 wines you'd want to take with you?
That's a very difficult question. 3 wines to take with me on a deserted island. Is it tropical there?
It's your deserted island.
It's my deserted
anything
island.
You want.
Okay, so let's assume it's tropical. So to keep it simple. So I think now in general terms, I won't say brands, but I think if I'm on a tropical island, a dry Riesling would be very nice. Certainly a rosé. And beyond that, probably something unique. You know what? A nice bottle of champagne.
I think that's a good selection for your hot tropical deserted island.
Yes.
What would you say is one winemaking area in the world that you would still like to explore?
Well, I've actually never been to the Rhone Valley, so I would like to go. I've been lucky enough to go to Burgundy and Alsace. I've never been to Bordeaux either, but for me, the Rhone I really am just more of, that's my style of wine. And I really like where, winemakers are going now, not as, funky, less of the Brettanomyces style, but more, the riper fruit. I think the Rhone would be really fun to go visit. So that's on my list. I mean, there's a lot of places certainly that I would love to go. South Africa, I think, would be interesting. Even I've heard it's really hard to get there, but Salta in Argentina, which is, everyone thinks Mendoza, but Salta is, supposed to be a really unique area. But there's so many. I mean, it's like, just you could keep going for hours on that question.
Too hard to pick just one.
That's right.
We're not quite finished yet. The last thing we're going to do is play our little game here at Wine Soundtrack, where we talk about music and wine. I don't know how much you listen to music when you're drinking or just in general, but based on some of the wines that we talked about today, I want you to tell me what you would be listening to or what it makes you think of. So let's start with your Stormwatch blend from Paso.
That's a good question. It's very tricky. Stormwatch. What would I like with Stormwatch? I mean, it's a pretty powerful wine, so I think you'd need something that's pretty fun and got something to it. So I'd say I'd go with some, in honor of Freddie Mercury right now with the movie out, with some Queen to drink my Stormwatch.
What about a dry Riesling?
Dry Riesling. I'd say probably something a little lighter than that. Maybe some light jazz would go with a dry Riesling.
And what about one of your beloved Rhones, focusing on a Grenache blend?
Grenache blend. What would be fun with a Grenache blend? Let's see. Oh, I don't know. We got to break it up a little bit. How about some Vivaldi with that, just because it's Italian and we can mix cultures, it's fun.
And going back to one of your most memorable wines, that Chianti single vineyard that you'd had years ago.
Andrea Bocelli, for sure.
I think that's a perfect way to end our little talk here. And I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Before we go, if you can remind people how they can find your wines and if they can visit you.
Sure. So we have our website. So there's sanantoniowinery.com and there's also ribolywines.com. So we have an online store there. Then we have 3 tasting rooms here in downtown Los Angeles, one in Ontario, California, and in Paso Robles, California. So we sell through there. And then as we grow nationally in wine shops and supermarkets, we will hopefully, in restaurants, you'll see more of our wines as well.
Well, Anthony, thank you so much for joining us today at Wine Soundtrack, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Allison. Really appreciate it. Happy holidays to you.
Happy holidays.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.